Okay, everyone, it is 6 o'clock. If a few of you could turn on your cameras, that does help me tell if I'm cutting out or whatever. So just a handful of you would do. I'd really appreciate that. Gonna give it about 45 seconds to really get going because, tech issues seem to slow people down on logging on exactly right. Which is why it's always appreciated that you log in just a smidge early. Okay. Few things to go over. You took your midterm last week. I have not graded those yet. You are doing your midterm paper today. Not today, sorry. This week that is due on Sunday night. Like all the stuff we do together is due on Sunday nights. I am going to be showing you and talking about the midterm here in a second, as soon as I get all of my stuff in gear. I'm a little slow today, mainly because I had a chaotic dinner with my children, which, is just kind of how children are. Let's stick with screen one. Okay, so we're here at our Monday night session tonight. This week we are talking about kinship and these structures that are very closely related to family, but aren't quite. Anyway, basically the short of it is, and it's a touch confusing. I'll talk about it a couple of times tonight. There's an artificial gap between the kinship material and the family material in our textbook. This isn't unique to this textbook. Sociologists tend to talk about kinship and family altogether, while anthropologists tend to break it out. That's just kind of a divide between the different disciplines. I think it's a little bit confusing, but that's probably because I'm a sociologist. Anyway, I changed this morning. So if you looked at this before this morning, you might note the difference. Instead of having a quick quiz like we've been having, which are still good when we have it, I replaced that with a 2-question quiz on the film that we're going to be looking at tonight. We're not going to be watching that together, namely because it's seen that given the materials we have, that doesn't quite work. So I'll show you where to find that film in a second, but it is on the film Paris is Burning. And then you can even pull this quiz up and look at it because it has unlimited time. That is not true at the top. It says this is a quick quiz. You only have 10 minutes. That's not true. I couldn't get that to disappear. You just pull this open and you answer these questions to go with the film, and you can have it up the whole time you're watching the film. Like I said, it is not timed. Earlier this semester, we discussed the difference between subculture and counterculture. Are the people participating in the fashion shows depicted in the film part of a subculture or a counterculture? Justify your answers. So before you watch the film and before you answer this, maybe look up subculture and counterculture. I'll probably discuss that right before I want you to watch the film. And then fictive kinship is clearly very important to the lives of people participating in the shows. Explain how fictive kinship is helpful for those participants. We're going to talk about fictive kinship this evening. So if you don't know that term yet, it's totally cool. You'll be applying that term when you are watching the film. I'm talking about it as if you're going to watch the film immediately after lecture. That is how it's structured to do it. But since it is 2 different feeds and 2 different places, if it really makes sense for you to watch it at a different time, that's a possibility. But I timed it so that this was part of our time together tonight. So I guess the suggested serving size is to do it after lecture. Anyway, though, going back to the actual structure of the class. You will see under recorded lectures and lecture slides, the Paris is Burning film. There it is. Okay. Is there. If you would rather watch it on YouTube with full screen, you can click on down there. Yes. If it disappears from YouTube for some reason over the course of this week, please let me know. I uploaded it in a way that is not entirely the best. So if it disappears, just let me know. It's a technical kind of thing. Going back to our course home. Just finish off all this junk. So this week's paper, which is the midterm paper, so it's worth a whole lot more. It is, and it should be 1,000 to 1,500 words, which is longer than your average paper. This paper is modified from an exercise on page 62 of the Cultural Anthropology Journal. That's just to give you context. I'll read this and then I'll go back. Kinship is often traced through descent or marriage, but what about other people whom you consider to be your family, but do not fit into that criteria? Anthropologists call those relationships fictive kin, so do sociologists. We assign these people family relationships and monikers, even though they aren't actually related to us by descent or marriage. In the United States, many children grow up with adults that they refer to as their uncle or their aunt, but who are not their siblings of either their mother or their father. These relationships are often important in our lives. And then in your essay, where you're describing your fictive kin, be sure to define the underlying terms. So for that, I will be grading you on your understanding of the term descent, marriage, and then under there, fictive kin. Fictive kin is the big one. Identify the fictive kin in your life. Most of us, all of us have these people in one way or another. If you can't you can probably immediately think of these people. If you can't, you can be a little bit flexible where you have to for the purpose of writing the paper. How did you find out that you have this kind of relationship? Did you define the relationship yourself, or did someone determine you would have this relationship? So this applies if you are, if you grew up with the fictive kin, right? My godkids probably, I never directly asked them, but they probably thought I was related to them by blood for some time, probably. And so they did not make that decision. However, sometimes as adults, we take on people that become fictive kin. I have a friend who I consider her to be my sister, even though we're not related. And with that comes these feelings of, well, she's being she's being really stupid right now, but what can I do? I'm stuck with her. I'm not really actually legally stuck with her in any way, right? But that's the nature of fictive kin, is that kind of bond that you would feel normally with kinship networks. So the paper is going to be 1,000 words, Times New Roman or Calibri, double-spaced font, standard margins. Papers submitted via Blackboard Learn. Students are not to submit papers via email, directed to do so. So if you're having tech glitches, basically, whenever you see that, I just don't want everyone submitting by email because that creates a bog on me. But if you can't submit via Learn for some reason, you send stuff to me by email, that's fine. All papers are to appear in ASA or similar style. As noted before, I just need you to be in some sort of academic style. I don't need you making up a paper style of your very own. You'd be shocked how many people actually do that. You will note that you do not need citations on this paper. That includes citations and references because you're going to be talking about your life, right? If you want to type in that you're pulling from our textbook or pulling from the lecture, that's okay, but this is a personal reflection piece, so you don't need, for this assignment, and you don't need citations and references. So those will be freebie points for you. Are there any questions about this before we move on?
I have a question.
Sure.
So just to double check, we can do in any like writing style, like MLA format would be fine.
That's
right?
totally fine. Yeah, I just need it to be in a style. Yes. Yes, that's fine.
Hey, thank you.
Good. Good question. Anything else? No? Okay, cool. Let us then move on to our lecture for this evening as I juggle everything around. Okay, if you guys don't see my PowerPoint right now, please let me know. I think it's there, so that's good. I'm gonna readjust my frames ever so slightly. Not sure if this narration is in any way helpful. There we go. Okay, anyway, enough of listening to me rumble to myself. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
Good, okay, thank you. Good, there's something weird happening with my audio, but it's basically just coming out the wrong holes, but I think it's fine. Dimension of culture, this is lecture 7.1, specifically on kinship, as I addressed a moment ago. This is our general agenda for this evening. I believe this is still accurate. The way I put together my presentations is that I usually lay out my agenda first. So if it's ever screwy or doesn't match the presentation, it's because I changed it around as I wrote it, but this should be good. First, we're going to talk about a few caveats before we really get into this presentation. There's a few spots in here that are just kind of weird that I have to address before I start talking about it. Then we'll talk about the basic vocabulary of kinship. We'll talk about what exactly dissent is. We're going to talk about kinship and gender. We'll talk about issues in families, and then we'll talk about changing families. After that, it is intended that you watch the documentary Paris is Burning and deal with that material. And honestly, it's if you're anyway, there are so many ways to be interested in that documentary. It's really super interesting. If you're in any way interested in anthropology or LGBT issues or race issues or New York in the 1970s, it's a really super interesting documentary. So these notes. Domestic abuse is discussed in this lecture. So if this is something that is difficult for you, please be aware of that. This discussion does include not a thorough discussion, but some discussion of both physical and sexual abuse. If you are in a situation where you need help, either due to a past or present abuse, feel free to contact the counseling center at Otterbein. I called them just to see what you should do. Actually, I talked to them earlier this week. Licensed counselors are available to you at 614-823-1333. Or if you feel more comfortable with a peer-led counselor, so someone who is also a college student now, The number where you can get help with that is 614-823-1759. I just always, anytime I talk about domestic abuse issues, I want to include that information for people. So that's the first note. The second note is that this concept of kinship is close to marriage. I already actually talked about this a second ago. I'll restate it. We'll not be discussing marriage this week. We are going to be discussing marriage and intimate relationships in far more detail next week. So I don't want you to feel like I just completely am not going to talk about it or I'm overlooking that. That's just the structure of it. But yeah, sociologists and anthropologists do tend to cover these topics differently. I'm going over some of the highly technical kind of stuff as is present in this chapter, really to understand why anthropologists dig more into this than sociologists, understand that in the 1900s and 1800s, for a good portion of that, anthropologists were very deeply interested also in genealogy. And that's something that never really carried over into sociology. That's where all of these highly technical genealogical stuff comes from, is largely the deep anthropological stuff. We are going to talk about a little bit in the lecture, but don't, basically, there's a bunch of stuff in this chapter that won't necessarily be on the test. And just like the previous test, you'll know full well what will be and won't be on the test. Not all the relationships present in this lecture are present in our society. Some are present in other societies. Some were present in our past. That doesn't mean that these relationships, that the relationships in our society are any more or less meaningful than are in other societies. It just means that it's different, right? It's a pretty standard social science kind of stance to take. And then finally, who cares about this garbage? Yeah, it is a little bit dry, sorry. There are two big reasons to look at this kind of stuff. First of all, if you're like me, you might come from a very large, very complex family where you have like cousins once removed and all that weird second cousins, third cousins, that kind of stuff. This may help you understand those people you are related to, but don't quite understand that. So that's always good to know. Or you could be a person, and you are a person, we all are. We live in a very diverse world, and people have family that are different than your family, right? They have different family relationships than you have. So everyone has it and does it a little bit differently. And that's why these kind of studies are useful for us to know. So basically, different families are different. That's the short of that. So let's talk about the very basics of this in the very basic vocabulary actually of kinship. So kin is defined as relatives or relations, usually those related by common descent. So, and really the point of this slide is to differentiate between kin and extended family. So when we talk about kin in a social scientific sense, we are talking about a person or people. That's what we're talking about with kin. So that's in your brain. That's what kin is. Extended family is a large group of relatives, usually including at least 3 generations, living either in one household or in close proximity. So when social scientists talk about extended family, we're talking about a very specific type of living situation. And that definition of extended family might be different than how you understand extended family. When I first started engaging this kind of scholarly academic material, that it's different. That's a different definition, because I always called my cousins and my grandma and my aunts and my uncles extended family, but that's not what extended family is. By these definitions, my Aunt Sherry is kin, right? So it's a different thing. So therefore, you probably have kin. Most of us have some kind of kin, but you probably do not have extended family, because in this definition, extended family is a very specific living situation. It's a living situation that until relatively recently was pretty rare in the United States, and in the modern United States tends to be a little bit more common among immigrant families, but it is found among other people. Other basic, I love words that just define how we use words. So kinship terminology, this is a term used in this material. Kinship terminology are the words used to identify different categories of kin in a particular culture. These terms are culturally aligned. They are different from the terms used by social scientists. So I'm not gonna quiz you on what does brother, sister, mother, father mean, right? So this kinship terminology stuff are the words we use to refer to the people who are related to us, to refer to our kin. So examples of kinship terminology in American culture include brother, sister, mother, father, cousin, mother-in-law, stepdad. Obviously, when I say American culture there, I mean dominant American culture. Obviously, there are subcultures and ethnic groups that use different terms, but those are the most commonly used kinship terminology in the United States. And obviously, it also goes beyond that. This isn't comprehensive. Obviously, we have father-in-laws, we have stepmoms, we have all this other stuff. So sometimes these words and these terms relating to what's that term? Kinship terminology, sometimes there is a direct translation from one culture to another, right? So examples are words for grandmother. We have abuelas, we have omas, we have babushkas. All of these are direct translation to grandmother. And grandmother, just like mother, is a really super duper common kinship term across societies. They aren't in every single society, but most societies have those words. However, some cultures do have different terms and concepts of kinship. So some cultures refer to mothers and mother sisters as the same term. We find those more in more tribal societies where people are living with their relatives in a true extended family situation where it might not really make a difference which of these ladies birthed you, right? They are all taking care of you all in the same way, right? So some of those societies don't really have defining words like that. Some cultures have much looser definitions of what a cousin is. We see this especially in parts of the Middle East, where cousin could be somebody who is related to you by blood, or it could be someone that grew up in your neighborhood or your small village, and they're all considered your cousins. That is particularly common in rural areas within the Middle East. Additionally, some parts of the United States have much looser definitions of aunt or auntie, right? We see this in subcultural groups and ethnic groups in the United States. This is particularly common in areas of the South, specifically among African American populations. These terms aunt and auntie are looser. Linguists have identified 6 separate types of kinship terminology. I just put that in there for your interest. Your textbook goes into more detail on that. I'm not going to test you on those specific kinship terminology groups, but they have found them. And it's an interesting idea that there are about 6 general schema that people think of in terms of, well, who are my relatives? And if you, it's interesting stuff. I'm just not digging super deep into it. So, affinial relatives. These are your relatives by marriage. So in other words, these are your in-laws. So your mother-in-laws, sister-in-laws. I'm presuming most of you aren't married, but if you ever go down that road, your wife's cousin, your cousin's husband, right? That's a filial. I don't know what I just said a second ago. It said a filial relatives. Inheritance. Basically, this is just a slide where I had to give you these two definitions. I could put them anywhere else that made sense. Inheritance, if you don't know that term, is the transfer of property between generations. If you probably know what inheritance is, it's exactly what you think of for this, the purpose of this. But inheritance is super important when we talk about kin, because one of the major reasons societies keep track of kin and kinship is because of the mechanics of how stuff goes down when people die and who gets the stuff. So it's a super important part of these social structures. Kinship, then, is a culturally defined relationship established on the basis of ties or formed through marriage. That's the big overarching term. So a whole lot of these things that we're talking about are all kinship. Then a kinship system is the totality of kin relationships, kin groups, and terms for classifying kin in a society. This is the system that kinship is organized into. When we're not being nerdy social scientists, we just call that family, or however you think of it, but we use these hyper-specific terms so that we can talk about hyper-specific things. We don't just throw these vocab words at you for nothing. It's so we can be super specific about the thing we're talking about. Succession, then, is the transfer of office or social position between generations. Now, usually, this is a very, very super informal thing, especially in our society, right? But if you are talking about a society that has some sort of royalty or some sort of next in line concept, succession is more important to those types of societies. In our society, we do see a smidge of this kind of succession thing. So like when a grandmother dies and the kin of that family are deciding, well, whose house is Christmas going to be at this year, right? Or, well, who's kind of in charge now? Then that person that kind of takes charge informally, that is also a type of succession. And if you're thinking this material through, you're probably thinking of your own family situations in examples for that, and that's fine. This is stuff that it does make sense for you to make your own applications, I suppose. Let's talk about descent, because there's a bunch of different ways we can talk about descent. There are more types of descent laid out in the textbook that I have laid out here. I'm not going to pull one of those things randomly out of the book and quiz you on all that stuff. We'll be working mostly with what is in the presentation. So descent is defined as the culturally established affiliation between a child and one or both parents. This concept is relatively similar across cultures, but the system of descent can vary quite a bit. So every culture I am aware of, I don't like saying all cultures, but every culture I am aware of has this concept of descent, that these people are the parents of this person, right? And that's the idea that you have, right? And almost every society has that. Additionally, though, what that definition specifically means can vary, and you may be thinking, well, what the hell does that mean? We're going to go over it in the following slides. Additionally, though, reasons for keeping track of descent can also vary, And these also can change over time. The reasons why we kept track of descent in the United States in the 1800s are very different than the reasons we keep track of descent today. It's not super duper critical in our society today to even keep track of descent. But it's still part of our society is the short of it. You probably don't want it to go away. You probably want to maintain relationships with your cousins, etc. Maybe you don't, but you might. So why do we keep track of descent? It's easier to determine inheritance, right? Most societies, especially more traditional societies, they keep track of descent for the purposes of inheritance. So when the home is a farm and the farm is a business, it's a big, big deal, right? So when the old man dies, figuring out who's in charge and who is in charge of this business, which is our family farm, that's a huge deal. And you can also obviously then apply those to aristocracies as well. Additionally, we do this to figure out who's going to take care of kids or take care of old people, right? Whose job is it to take care of these human beings that need taken care of? That's a reason to keep track of descent. I don't really know if people watch Maury Povich all that much, but half of that show is figuring out who the baby mama is, right? Or the baby daddy, whatever. We know who the mama is, right? That's descent. Also to figure out who not to have sex with. That's probably the major reason we keep track of descent in our society today. And that sounds kind of silly today, but in super isolated cultures, this stuff is deadly serious because when people have children with their cousins, it creates horribly tragic childhood illnesses, really wickedly bad stuff. It's not just a matter of being gross. It is a matter of life and death, especially for small isolated communities. There are different types of descent. So the way we think of descent in the United States isn't the only way to do it. Double descent is one mode of descent. It might be a mode of descent that you're involved with. It might not be. This is the tracing of descent through both matrilineal and patrilineal links. This presentation is a little bit out of order. Matrilineal means tied to the mother. We're going to talk about this later on. And then patrilineal means tied to the father. Each of these is used for different purposes. So if you are in a double descent situation, it's probably because of some ethnic identity. You have white bread people of European descent like me aren't in so many double descent situations. One good example of double descent is people who are Jewish. You, within traditional Judaism, you are Jewish if your mother is Jewish, right? So that is an element of, well, that's where it makes a difference, right? But inheritance in the United States, particularly traditionally in the United States, who would get the family farm was determined by who your father was, right? So let's use this example then of a Jewish family in the 1800s. Well, who your mother was determined if you were Jewish or not, but who your father was and who owned the business determined who actually got the business. That is an example of a double descent situation. Bilateral descent is a system of descent under which individuals are equally affiliated with their mother's and their father's descent groups. This is how it is for most people and most families in the United States. I am part of my mother's family. I'm also part of my father's family, right? That's bilateral descent. Not every society does that. Some societies, one side or the other, we know who our family is, and yeah, sure, you might have had a kid with them, but that doesn't really matter because that's not how we think of it. Yeah, it's kind of, and it's kind of mind warping to think of this stuff a little bit because it's how we traditionally think of our family units. Ambilineal descent, there we go. That's how you say that word, is a form of bilateral descent where an individual may choose to affiliate with either their father's or their mother's descent group. Now, this is a little, if you really wanted to just like completely disown your mother's side or completely disown your father's side, you could do that in the United States, but that isn't really what we're talking about. This is more having to do with systems specifically oriented where at the time of your adulthood, you specifically choose, okay, I'm going to be with my mother's side, or okay, I'm going to be with my father's side. This isn't something that's really present in our society, but it is something that's present in some societies. Consanguineal descent. This is a term that describes relation by descent. So yeah. So this is how we most typically in the United States think of descent. So consanguineal means with the blood, as opposed to by marriage, by adoption, or by fictive kin. This, like I said, this is how we typically think of descent, but it's, it's not necessarily how it always is. There are different ways to determine family than descent. This message there, it's going to ride across the next couple terms. A descent group is one way to determine family. This is actually a picture of one part of my family that I'm related to. This is actually a relatively small turnout for our annual Labor Day picnic. This is from a couple years ago. Anyway. This is an example of a descent group that I am part of. This is a group of kin who are descendants of a common ancestor extending beyond 2 generations. So this collection of people that I am related to are all the descendants or married to the descendants of my great-grandmother and great-grandfather. And like I said, this is maybe about a quarter of that total group too. This, like I said, this is a relatively small selection. I think it was from 2019. It was a relatively small turnout. So that's a descent group. Lineage then is a group of kin whose members trace descent from a common known ancestor. The reason why both these terms are on with this picture is because this is a descent group, and this also is a group that we all trace our lineage back to my great-grandmother and great-grandfather. A clan. A clan is a group, a way to determine family that isn't really present in the United States. A clan is defined as a unilineal kinship group whose members believe themselves to be descended from a common ancestor, but who they cannot trace this link through known relatives. So clans are most typically tied to geography and geography your family's from. Clan, and this term clan isn't super present in the United States for a couple reasons. The first reason is most of us, except Native Americans, most of us have only been here a couple hundred years max, right? The clan concept tends to more apply to people who have lived in areas for thousands of years. This is a clan map of Scotland. The Scottish clans still are a relatively powerful social concept. And there are people who claim clan status in the United States in some small pockets. Another reason we don't really have this concept of clan is a very real social reason, is that the discussing racist group, the Ku Klux Klan, has kind of co-opted this word and they spell it with a K, right? It's another reason why racists suck. They screw up things for everyone. So as I mentioned, clan is often tied with geography. It is also present in Africa and some parts of Asia as well. This concept of the clan and the clan honor and the family honor and all of that sort of thing. Very interesting kinds of concepts. But it's a great example of a family structure that can mean so much to people in other societies, but the average American has absolutely no concept of clan identity. This term kindred, we're going to skip this one because it's not really, you don't need to know the term kindred. Anyway, okay. Let's talk about some different types of relatives that you probably do have, if you do, especially if you don't come from a super small family. There are lineal kin. Now, this is a very specific social scientific term. You wouldn't refer probably to anyone, especially if you actually have a relationship to them, as being your lineal kin. So lineal kin are related by a single unbroken line, typically of the same sex. So my lineal kin are my grandfather, my father, and me, right? And that term lineal kin is relevant in those situations where we say this, sometimes we say this, you know, keep that family name alive and reason to have boys or whatever. That is an expression of the importance of lineal kin. That also does apply to grandmother, mother, daughter as well. But yeah, it's just a super specific term. Collateral kin then. These are kin descended from a common ancestor, but not in a direct ascendant or descendant line, right? Your collateral kin include your siblings, if you have siblings. Basically, the concept being between lateral kin and collateral kin is that even if you weren't alive, your siblings might still exist, right? And that's the reason for that. And a lot of this ties in with talking about genetic disorders and that sort of thing as well. Additionally, cousins are also collateral kin. This distinction was and is very important for traditional inheritance schemes. And the example we're most familiar with is ancient European aristocracies and who's going to be the king and whatever, that sort of thing. And it still is important in some parts of the world. Cross cousins. Cross cousins are a type of relative. These are children of a parent's siblings of the opposite sex. So who cares? Why is that important to make out that distinction? Well, your cross kin have different last names than you do, right? This is my cousin Cassie. She has a different last name than me, and she married a guy, this is her husband, that also has a different last name. If you knew me but didn't know my cousin Cassie, especially because she has dark hair and dark eyes, more so than me, she really doesn't resemble me in much of any kind of way, right? She's cross kin, cross cousins. And this isn't super duper important in our society, like I said, but in some societies where there are stricter, stronger gender hierarchies, that is super important. So examples of cross cousins are your mother's brother's kids or your father's sister's kids. An easy way to think of it, well, if you're male, is those people who are your cousins who have a different last name than you do. Now, obviously, a lot of times people aren't even maintaining family names like that with women keeping their own name in marriage too. And that's a great choice for people to make. But it brings up the point that these concepts are dynamic and changing in our society. And that is super interesting from a social scientific standpoint. Parallel cousins. Parallel cousins are the children of a parent's same-sex siblings. So your mother's sister's kids or your father's brother's kids. These people, so parallel cousins are the opposite concept as cross cousins, right? These people are your cousins that may have your same last name. And again, as I mentioned, this is way more relevant if you are trying to determine which son gets the majority of property when the father dies, i.e. in royalty or property disputes, whatever, in traditional marriage schemes. Here we have a family tree of the Spanish Habsburgs, who were an intensely powerful royal family in European history. And they were also, as you will notice, this isn't what family trees are supposed to look like. Family trees aren't usually pointed to the opposite direction that way. They were intensely inbred. And this resulted in very deeply troubling mental health issues. I can't see the name. I know this guy by reputation. I can't remember, but he was very deeply and troublingly inbred. He probably lived a very sad life as well, even though he was the king of his empire for a little bit, but he was deeply mentally incapacitated to the point where he could not rule effectively because blood disorders basically came down through the family line as well. But that is an example of parallel cousin. Anyway, exogamy. Exogamy, so this right here, the Spanish Habsburg example, is the opposite of exogamy. Exogamy is a rule specifying that a person must marry outside of their particular group. This concept of exogamy is far more common among highly isolated traditional cultures. We see this in some South American indigenous tribes. We also see it among the Amish. The Amish are intensely interested in preventing inbreeding, but their population is very small. So in order to set up a family where those kinds of genetic blood disorders don't occur, they have to be very careful. And some Amish communities do have exogamy rules that state that they have to, that young men usually have to move somewhere else to find a wife. Let's talk about kinship and gender. Because obviously so much of this is loaded in a gender sense. Our family and our relationships with our relatives are one of the areas in our society in which gender is most deeply embedded. I'll define gender here. We're definitely going to talk about definitions of gender more as we go on. Gender is defined as the total set of behaviors associated with being male, female, or another gender, right? God. Anyway, I can just hear my kid singing. Anyway, though, gender is behavior in modern social scientific terms, how you act, male or female, or some other non-binary gender. It's not the same as sex. Sex is a biological term. Again, I'll talk about these in great detail in a couple weeks. Some of these behaviors are overt, some of them are more subtle, but basically all of these kind of, that's what we mean when we say gender in the social sciences. Patriarchy is a social system that is set up to place men in a superior position over women. We do live, even those though those are old-fashioned rules and they're not enforced, we do live in a patriarchy. We do live in a society in which men have different social status and social standing than women. We might not like it. We might think it's a bad thing, and that's fine to think it's a bad thing, but it is the social reality we live in. We live in a patriarchy. We are definitely less patriarchal than we used to be, and we are getting better very slowly, but patriarchy is still part of something that's built into our society. Patrilineage, that term I talked about a while back, is a lineage formed by descent in the male line. Patrilineal descent then is a rule that affiliates a person to kin of both sexes through, that should say males, it shouldn't say females there on the slide, through males only. So who is your family? Your family is the male side of your family. That's patrilineage in a patrilineage type society. Patrilineage is not the primary way we do descent in our society. Patrilocal residence. This is a system of residence in which a wife lives with her husband or near her husband's kin after marriage. So you get married to this guy, if you're a woman, because these are also typically almost exclusively heterosexual societies as well. You get married to a man, and then as a woman, you go and live with his village and his family, and you might never see your family again. That is a system known as patrilocal residence. We do not have that sort of system in the United States. Matriarchy then. Matriarchy is a social system that's set up to place women in a superior position over men. Matriarchy is far more common in hunter-gatherer societies. They tend to be more matriarchal. The vast majority of human societies historically do tend to be patriarchal, but there definitely have been matriarchal societies. Matrilineage then is lineage formed by descent in a female line, and matrilineal descent is a rule that affiliates a person to kin of both sexes through the females only. Matrilocal residence then, and obviously these are parallel definitions to the previous slide. Matrilocal residence is a system of residence in which a husband lives with or near his wife's kin after marriage. That is matriarchy and all that stuff. So these are this slide and the previous slide, they're effectively the same but opposite terms. Non-unilineal descent is any system of descent in which both the father's and the mother's lineage have equal claim over the individual. Most modern American society is non-unilineal. You belong to both of your parents' families, probably. I don't know your specific situation, but you probably can describe your family as being non-unilineal. Now, that's a lot of the backup information. Basically, everything mentioned up to this point in the presentation would be the things that you would learn prior to really getting started as an anthropologist or sociologist, right? This would just be stuff you knew. And then this problem in families and then changes in families. If you were to go to grad school for anthropology or sociology, this would probably be the stuff you would be studying specifically. So there are problems facing American families. One of them is life expectancy. And we don't typically think of life expectancy increasing as being a problem, but it is a problem in terms of what's happening to the elderly population. About 10% of the elderly live below the poverty line. So 1 in 10 elderly Americans live below the poverty line. That is higher than the national average. Care of the elderly is no longer considered a primary function of the family. In more traditional societies, That is definitely more of a function of the family. For example, in American societies, a primary function of a family with children is to take care of those children, right? We don't have that same deeply embedded drive to take care of old people the way we do to take care of little kids. That's that. We might feel something, but we don't feel that overwhelming drive, and it's not backed up by our laws. Over 40% of senior citizens will spend some time in a nursing home. That is a reality of American life. The average time spent in a senior living facility, however, is less than 5 years. If you don't actually think about what's happening there, it's pretty stark and kind of scary. Basically, when most people move into nursing homes is when they start to die, kind of, right? Or when they're not able to take care of themselves anymore. Very few people move into senior living facilities when they are super duper healthy, right? But however, with that said, 60% of senior citizens don't spend time in nursing homes either. This is a little less than half of people. Sometimes we think of very old age as, well, you're definitely going to be in a nursing home. For some of us, it's not necessarily an inevitability. And it's important through your whole life to think about where you want to wind up, right? Do you never want to get anywhere near a senior living facility? Do you not want to be in that situation? Well, save your money in a specific way that way, right? Or could it maybe sound okay, right? Could you, if you can't go up the stairs anymore and you can't take care of yourself, maybe you do want to live in a senior living facility and you want to pick the right one. That is also a thing. And these are things that all of us need to think about, especially if we intend to live to be very old, which I hope most of us do. Now, this phenomena of aging is largely tied with the baby boomers, right? So that huge bulk, there's a reason they're called boomers, is because originally they were called baby boomers. And the baby boom occurred in the late 1940s and early 1950s, immediately following World War II. In that period, there was a massive uptick of births. So there were many, many more kids in the 50s and 60s than there had been previously ever in American society. And also, they were a greater percentage than they have been and continue to be, right? So there's a reason we have so many old people in our society now, is that it's true. There are more boomers than there are the rest of us. And this has driven social trends throughout their life course. When they were little kids, America was really oriented to kids and family stuff. When they were adults earning their adult money, right, we were a very materialistic type society. Now that they are moving into old age and into old folks' homes, our economy is likewise very much oriented toward health care. So once they die, our society, though, will still have this age issue. In the year 2100, 2100, I haven't figured out how to say this word yet. Maybe I'll have a chance to, probably won't. I'll be about 120 then. The average life expectancy is projected to be 81.69 years. So if you a child born in the year 2100 will probably live to be about 81.69 years. Now, it's important to point out when you start looking at this kind of research that life expectancy can be skewed by infant mortality and erratic post-adolescent behavior. Well, what does that mean? That means that a fair number of people die before the age of 2, right? And a fair number of people also die. Hey, listen to this, you males out there in your early 20s. We tend to kill ourselves off in our 20s from doing stupid shit. from drinking too much, from driving too fast. And that's a very real phenomena in demographics. I want all of you to live past your 20s. It's demographically a very dangerous time. So if you live to the age of 30, this number of 81.69 years is definitely skewed. Those of you, I think most of you were born after the year 2000. Those of you who were born after the year 2000, if you make it to the age of 30, you stand a really good chance of making it to the age of 100, right? Take that into consideration when you are, say, deciding your retirement or how you're going to save and all that stuff, because you might live a whole lot longer than you plan on it. My grandmother once said to me, Christmas a couple years ago, she said, "Oh, Jeremy, I'm so old." Right? Well, she was 85 then. Yeah, she is pretty old. And she's 88 now, I think. Well, the reason probably why she said that was that her mother died in her 60s, right? And her mother didn't die super young for her era. We are getting older and older and older because life expectancy is going out. Now let's look at this chart a little bit. And this is that number at 81.69 of all races of people born in 2000. But you will notice also that if you're male, note that your life expectancy is shorter. Again, it doesn't have to do with anything. It's all behavioral. What causes males to live shorter periods of time? If you are white male and white female, white females do have the longest longevity. This is largely due to white privilege that we'll talk a little bit more when we talk about race. It's white privilege minus dumb male behavior. And when I say that, I certainly did a lot of stupid things too. I was lucky and survived to the age of 30. And then here we see Black male and Black female. And this is that same phenomena here without the benefit of white privilege. Really super stark racial material here. And this is, I didn't put where the source material is from. This is actually from the CDC. So very reliable social scientific research there. Yeah. So let's move on to the next topic of domestic violence. Domestic violence is by far the most common form of, this definition is slightly messed up, and these are my own words. The most common form of violence, you can probably scratch out that word family there. So domestic violence is the most common form of violence in the United States. It includes behaviors abusers use to gain and maintain power over their victims. Domestic abuse can include physical abuse. I need a drink of water. It can include physical abuse, and that's the thing we think of most commonly when we talk about domestic violence. But it can also include verbal abuse, constantly screaming at the person, making them feel like they're stupid. It can include financial abuse, so not letting the person have any money. It can include sexual abuse, so rape within marriage or even outside of marriage, that sort of thing. And then also psychological abuse. Psychological abuse goes beyond verbal abuse to making the person feel like they're going insane. So like moving furniture and not telling them until saying, no, we haven't moved the furniture. Really ties in with that, with the definition of gaslighting, of making a person feel like they're going crazy. And as I mentioned, I will be talking about domestic violence in relationships in greater detail in our next lecture. That's just kind of setting the stage for that. Now, rates of domestic violence are about equal across racial and ethnic groups, sexual orientations, and religious groups. Domestic violence is basically the same in its occurrence, regardless of who you are. However, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. People are more likely to be killed or attacked by family members than anyone else. Statistically, you are most likely to be killed by somebody who you are living with or who you have an intimate relationship with. That is one of the basic tenets of criminology, actually. That's why if you're a true crime person, or if you have watched a lot of Law and Order or whatever, they always ask the husband first or the wife first. Well, because statistically, that's the person most likely to kill someone. That's actually good police work. Domestic violence, however, is also a problem in the LGBT community. Any community that has problems with perception by law enforcement is a community that has greater problems relating to domestic violence, because someone who abuses their spouse or their partner is somebody that could cause the end of that person's life, right? And unfortunately, in the LGBT community, police are less likely to take seriously a one male attacking another male and attacking them, or a woman attacking another woman, right? We perceive a grown man attacking a woman as being a more dangerous situation, and it certainly is a dangerous situation. But any situation in which somebody could be hurt by a person that they're sleeping in the same room with or the same house with is definitely a situation that is deeply dangerous. And police are getting better at taking domestic violence calls from the LGBT community seriously, but it's definitely a very real phenomenon. I might touch on that a little bit more next week. Children and the elderly also suffer at the hands of abusive family members. So that's super important to mention, because when we talk about domestic abuse, there's often this generic connotation that domestic abuse just means spousal or partner abuse. Domestic abuse absolutely also involves children and other people and elderly people. Child and elder abuse is likely to go underreported. That is due in part to the relative powerlessness of victims and the private settings of abuse. A little kid, before they even go to school, right, they are completely powerless to tell somebody if something really deeply troubling is happening in the house, right, because of their social isolation. And in terms of people who are at risk of abuse, people who are at risk of extreme social isolation and being trapped with their abuser are definitely at greater chance of abuse being very dangerous. And the same goes for the elderly as well, particularly if you're dealing with an elderly individual who isn't capable of communicating with the outside, or if an elderly individual is suffering from dementia. That is a person that might not even know they're being abused, which is a deeply troubling situation in and of itself. Obviously, and this may be putting things together in your brain, you may have thought, well, what is happening within COVID now in terms of domestic abuse and these kinds of situations? And from the material that I've seen, and it is absolutely a very dangerous time to be in a domestic abuse situation. This is a deeply troubling thing that's happening right now in our society. Child abuse, one thing that children and the elderly experience that spouses don't necessarily experience is neglect. Neglect occurs when a caregiver fails to provide adequate nutrition, sufficient clothing or shelter, and/or hygienic and safe living conditions. Now, a spouse who is being abused can absolutely be abused in some of these ways, but that spouse when the other spouse isn't looking, could maybe find something to eat, right? Or they could wash their own face or take a shower or something like that, right? A child, especially a little kid, is absolutely fully dependent on adults. So that in that way, neglect is much more, it's dramatically more common among children and also the elderly. I don't have that here. Yeah, the elderly can also experience neglect, though, especially if the elderly individual is either incapacitated in terms of physical well-being, they can't move that much, or they're mentally incapacitated. That is an especially troubling thing that occurs with people who are deep in Alzheimer's or other dementia, where they don't know when the last time they ate was, or they might not know when the last time they bathed was, and they have to be told to do those things. And if they're not living with someone who cares about their well-being, it can lead to dangerous situations. Yeah, really, really deeply troubling stuff. One second. Okay. Another form of child abuse is incest. Incest is defined as sexual contact between family members. However, incest is not necessarily always child abuse, which is kind of a troubling thing to think about. Specifically, incest is not child abuse when it occurs between equals, right? So if a brother and a sister engaged in some sort of sexual act, or two cousins engaged in a sexual act as children, that might not necessarily be abuse. It is abuse, though, when one cousin or sibling or whatever, or aunt or whatever, is in a position of authority or power over the other person. It's all about consent, and it's all about power. Now, that's not to say that incest isn't deeply troubling when it occurs among children. It's just a different dynamic of a thing that has to be dealt with, right? It might still be a situation where a social worker should get involved, but it's a different thing. Are there any questions on that? Does that make sense? No? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's troubling stuff. Elder abuse. Okay, here are types of elder abuse that are things that can happen to elderly people that can't necessarily happen to children. Elder abuse can include financial exploitation. So stealing the money of an elderly person, cashing their Social Security checks, taking advantage of stuff they have in their house. That is financial exploitation. Theft, especially theft by people who perceive themselves to be heirs of the elderly person, that is also a problem among the elderly. That occurs basically, and you know, in social work, this is seen a lot. People taking the things that they feel belong to them. Well, until grandpa's dead, it's still grandpa's, or until your dad's dead, it's still your dad's stuff. That is something you see when doing social work that helps elderly populations. Neglect, as I mentioned, it's similar to the neglect of children, but slightly different. And most cases of neglect do center around things like dementia and abandonment, either in a home or in a nursing home. So emotional abandonment, that's something that occurs a lot among senior citizens, where they're left to the nursing home to rot. Those are always very sad situations. or sometimes elderly people are abandoned in their own home too. And this kind of abandonment, it's not unheard of among the elderly, but way more common among the elderly than it is among children, because in our society, we do have this deeply embedded principle in our society that adults take care of children. We do not have embedded in our society that younger adults take care of very old people. So because that is not deeply ingrained in us, then these issues of abandonment and elder abuse can become more ugly and not as uncommon as we would want them to be. The short of a lot of this stuff is send your grandma a text message or give her a call or something. Grandma is probably lonely. Changing families. This isn't changing the family you belong in. This is the fact that our families are indeed changing. So this is shifting our concept. Families adapting to the challenges of living in a postmodern society often create family structures that look very different from what are so-called traditional families. So these include ex-spouses. So if someone gets divorced, then it's not always the case that two divorced spouses aren't in each other's lives anymore, especially if there are children, right? And what does that dynamic look like? And then when there are new partners, what does that look like? And then if there are children, what does that look like? All of these are part of what our family, and there are probably a lot more of these people in our family get-togethers, not this year, hopefully, because we all should stay home as much as we can, but it hurts. That's hard too. Anyway, but these are probably more common in our family get-togethers than they used to be. Certainly, this is the case with my family. Other kin. So being your cousin's roommate, right? Rooming with people who you are related to in a way that isn't super traditional. That is becoming more common in the United States. And then having these non-blood related kin in our lives, these very close families, even coworkers, people that we create family relationships. That is fictive kin, right? People, I'll just give you a definition there now. I don't know if I defined it on this next one. I don't know if I defined fictive kinship here. I have to. A fictive kinship are people who we effectively treat as family, even if they aren't actually related to us by blood. There's no marriage, there's no adoption, but they are family all the same. That's fictive kin. Transportation and communication technology makes it possible to maintain relationships across great distances. This is definitely something that is new in our modern society. So these terms, transmigrant and transnationalism, most accurately apply to people who are either immigrants themselves or closely related to new immigrant communities. So a transmigrant individual is someone who maintains close relationships with their home countries. That in the past has been defined as travel 2 times per year. So I have a friend who she tries to go to India where she grew up at least yearly and likes to go twice a year. That she absolutely would apply as being a transmigrant individual. Transnationalism then is a pattern of close ties and frequent visits by immigrants to their home countries. So transnationalism, and I have this mentioned here, it's new in some areas, but it has been common for a very, very long time. So transnationalism along the southern border of the United States has been a thing for decades, and probably longer than that. But now, because it is possible to fly back and forth, there are other immigrant populations that do consider themselves transnationalistic as well. Our film that we're going to be looking at this evening, in this film, we're looking at fictive kinship in the LGBT community. How is this related, right? This concept of fictive kinship is super duper common in populations that have in one way or another been severed from their original families. So examples of fictive people who have high degrees of fictive kinship, women who are in prison, they tend to form family structures as opposed to men who are in prison. Men who are in prison tend to form gang structures, which are markedly different kind of situations. Trans homeless youth, specifically within the LGBT community, are particularly prone to forming fictive kinship because they have nothing else. The reason why there's a really high population of trans homeless youth is because, unfortunately, a lot of trans youth get disowned by their families and they get kicked out when they come out. And that is a population that has a high chance of forming fictive kinship. And then we also see it among adolescent gang members. They might not necessarily talk about it as if it were a family. Sometimes they do, but we see those in observations about that. Now, this concept also is further explored in this week's writing exercise that we talked about earlier. And that is basically the gist of it, of what you need to watch this documentary. Are there any questions on what you're supposed to be doing? You're just going to be answering those brief essay, just a couple sentences, questions, answer the question, and then your writing assignment is on the fictive kin in your life. It's not a super complex concept, but it's a very important concept for understanding social life and social situations. Are there any questions on it though, or any of this?
I have a question.
Sure.
The little 2-question quiz thing and the paper, those are both due on Sunday, right? Still?
Yes, they are. Everything is due on Sunday. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Any other questions?
Could you re-explain what fictive kin is again?
Fictive kinship? Yeah, these are the people that we consider to be related to us, but they are not related to us legally or by blood. So these could be someone you're just super good friends with, or that. Brooke. One second about that question, Brooke. But yeah, these are people who are related to us that aren't actually, in a formal sense, related to us. So these are people that we feel like they're our family, right? So my friend Lauren, I went to graduate school with her. We've been through some really tough times together. She feels as if she's my sister. She's not actually my sister in any legal sense. That's fictive kinship. Does that make sense? Anyway, and there are, in the movie Paris is Burning, in the first 2 minutes, they start talking about people who their families and their lineages and being part of this family and that family. They're not talking about people they are related to. They are talking about these, like, they're effectively either gangs or clubs or whatever that they're part of. I didn't really introduce Paris is Burning as a film. Paris is Burning is all about these drag shows that occurred in New York City in the 70s, 80s, and the very early part of the 90s among gay, well, then they identified as being gay. I don't know how they would identify today. Among gay youth, right? Most particularly gay male youth. And we see an amazing intersection of what it means to be Black, what it means to live in New York City, what it means to be young, what it means to be gay in that era, and all of the intersectionality of all of that. Additionally, we see what New York City was like in the 70s and 80s, where New York was a dramatically different city then than it is today. New York was a pretty dangerous place then. There's a little bit of danger today, but not nearly as much as it used to be. So it's a really, don't groan about having to watch this movie. It's really amazingly excellent. Yeah. Anyway, though, Brooke, the INST event requirement, no, that's not a requirement for this class, and it hasn't been mentioned to me as something that we have to do. So the short of that question is, don't worry about the event requirement unless I bring it up, but I don't think, especially surrounding COVID, that it's something that we have to take care of. If you do find that, yeah, don't worry. If it comes up, I'll bring it up though. Any other questions?
So do significant others count as fictive kin, like before you're married?
That's an interesting question. In the definition of, no, is the short of it, Ben. Effectively, where significant others fall is in the spouse slot, if you will, in our society. Fictive kin are a different concept. That's a good question. It's a different concept.
Okay, thanks.
Good, thank you. Anything else? Last chance. Okay, so I think we are good to go. I haven't gotten through with grading your test yet. I am in a pretty good place email-wise, so that is fully operational right now. That's not to say I won't fall behind later in the week, but if you need anything, please let me know. I think everything is pretty straightforward as far as what we're doing this week. Yeah, if you need anything, just let me know. And with nothing else, see you later.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.